Greetings, Collective Coven, and welcome to another free book-umentary in the Archaeo-Astrology series. My name is Trey, aka Taboo Tarot Reader, author of Astrology for Divination and Archaeo-Astrology, Decolonize Your Horoscope. In today's book-umentary, we'll be centering the mystery of the, quote, Venus, unquote, figurines of Paleolithic and Neolithic matriarchal cultures. Cosmology is ancient sacred women's wisdom, so while the connection between the figurines and astrology is not obvious at first glance, the deeper you dive into the mystery, the more obvious it becomes. This is a juicy mystery indeed, synthesizing various researchers from multiple disciplines. But first things first, let's discuss why the more archaic term Venus figurines are problematic and deeply patriarchal terms.
Quote, the woman of Willendorf. Researchers criticize the term Venus and Venus art. Max Dashu calls Venuses little mothers. They present themselves in overlapping body positions. They show the same symbolic language by presenting large vulvas and breasts. In her latest book, Heidi Goldner-Abendrofen mentions the Venus of Willendorf, the woman of Willendorf, and talks about the Venus of Lausel as the woman of Lausel. Both authors criticize the term Venus art for its supposed sexism. They consider it a burden term, a fossil from patriarchy. I do use the term Venus, but use it only in a matriarchal sense. Matriarchal Aphrodite, her Greek name changed into the Latin name Venus, was the mother of heaven, earth, and underworld. It is a sacred goddess name. Venus art shows an evolution from clan mothers to mother goddesses and to the one and only mother above them all, she who stands at the beginning, the divine mother of earth and cosmos. I use the following definition. Venus art is the art of the primal ancient mothers. It is clan mother art and sacred feminine art from prehistoric and indigenous tribes which has life, death, and a new life as its central theme and depicts those clan mothers who are later deified. End quote by Dr. Anine van der Meer. Quote, fertility is only one among the goddess's many functions. It is inaccurate to call Paleolithic and Neolithic images fertility goddesses, as is still done in archaeological literature. Earth fertility became a prominent concern only in the food-producing era. Hence, it is not a primary function of the goddess and has nothing to do with sexuality. The goddesses were mainly life creators, not Venuses or beauties, and most definitely not wives of male gods. End quote via Dr. Marija Gimbutas. Rest in power.
If you're still tuned in after that preface, thank you so much. Let's now begin our journey into the mystery of the quadruple goddess the Mother Goddess, the OG Reverend Mother, Mother Superior. The lunar rhythm may have taught humans who menstruate how to count numbers, conceive of cycles, and create cosmological calendars via observation of the body. For example, in the sacred text of the ancient Maya, the Popol Vuh, it directly states that the four jaguar foremothers were the human beings who created the sacred Solkin 260-day calendar, which corresponds roughly with the human gestation process. And the 260-day Solkin cycle is made up of smaller intermeshing cycles, and the numerology is inherently feminine. 13 lunar numbers, Trecenas, and 9 gods of the night, or lords of the underworld, Shib Alba. The four jaguar foremothers were said to have fallen into step, walking with time itself. This implies to us that humans who menstruate and live in community with one another often synchronize, and by observing these synchronicities, they could correspond the cycles of the body to the cycles of the cosmos. It was the high priestesses, the doulas of ancient matriarchal and matrilineal cultures of the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras, therefore, who likely created cosmology, astrology, numerology. The lunar rhythm is 13 times faster than the solar rhythm. So let's remember this sacred number 13 on our journey. The 13 numbers, or trecenas, of the sacred Solkin 260-day calendar are inherently yin to the yang of the 20-day signs. When we understand that the yin lunar rhythm is 13 times faster than the yang solar rhythm, it intuitively and logically makes sense that 13 is an inherently lunar number. So let's dive deeper into the mystery and explore one particular example mentioned already, the goddess of Lausel.
Quote, the Lausel goddess, generally called the Venus of Lausel or Femme à la Corne, woman of the horn. This mother goddess was carved in Stone Age France 20 to 30,000 years ago. Her face is a mystery, and she was painted with red ochre, both common in goddess icons. She holds up a horn carved with 13 marks, symbol of the moon and the mystery of menstruation. This symbol is also a cornucopia, symbol of the abundance of the earth and goddess. Archaeologists argue about whether it's the one or the other, but it's both simultaneously. They hold the identical meaning, abundance and fecundity through the mother. End quote, via wiccaspirituality.com.
So this all begs the question, what are we looking at here, really? If this goddess confirms that at least 30,000 years ago, matriarchal and matrilineal cultures had worked out that there's approximately 13 lunations, 13 new moons within a solar year, that they were already in possession of this wisdom at least 30,000 years ago. Let's imagine how much longer time spans were required to accumulate this sacred wisdom. How old is this cosmology? How ancient is the awareness of astrology that likely was received from the moon? I feel the major arcana, the mystery of the high priestess, is definitely being invoked by the Lausel goddess. Paraphrasing Dr. Marija Gimbutas, all of the goddess civilization's sacred art is not realistic, but deeply symbolic. This is not meant to convey a living, breathing human being. Rather, there are layers of symbolism conveying different cosmological concepts to those who were initiated into the sacred cosmology. So because these figures are not pleasing to the modern toxic male gaze, there's this massive misunderstanding about what we're really looking at here. The cosmological symbolism, the proportion of circles. There are the inner spheres being invoked via the geometry of the goddess's pose. This gesture as well of holding up the horn is obviously a crescent moon symbol, which we see in the Rider-Waite tarot deck imagery. So there's layers to the symbolism that is telling us that this is not the work of, quote, primitive, unquote, minds. This is not the work of, quote, hunter-gatherers, unquote. This is the work of a sophisticated culture. Any and all patriarchal projections onto the goddess block our true understanding of the symbolism that a matriarchal goddess-centered civilization left behind. Perhaps ironically, the patriarchal misnomer of Venus reduces the goddess's cosmological complexity merely to the physical layer, when there's so much more to her beyond the biological function of sex. Dr. Marija Gimbutas, in The Language of the Goddess, presents information that hints that the runic language that we associate as a magical alphabet of the Vikings and Celtic cultures of Northern Europe actually is much older and has its prototype in matriarchal and matrilineal cultures of the Paleolithic and Neolithic periods, possibly, most likely, coming from the southern European region. Many runes and other runic symbols, such as the appropriate swastika, can be identified in sacred art from the matriarchal Vinča culture, also known as Turdas culture. The Vinča Turdas culture is a Neolithic archaeological culture of Southeast Europe dated to the period 5400 to 4500 BC.
Quote, ancient tablets found in South Bulgaria are written in the oldest European script found ever, German scientists say. The tablets unearthed near the southern town of Karjali are nearly 7,000 years old and bear the ancient script of the Cretan, aka Minoan, civilization, according to scientists from the University of Heidelberg who examined the founding. This is the Cretan writing, also known as Linear's A script, which dates back to the 15th and 14th century BC. The discovery proves the theory of the Bulgarian archaeologists that the script on the foundings is one of the oldest known to humankind. The archaeologist Nikolai Ovcharov announced Wednesday. Ovcharov, who was heading the archaeological expedition in the ancient Perikon complex near Karjali, called the discovery revolutionary. It throws a completely different light on Bulgarian history, he said in an interview for the national television. The tablets, dated to around 5300 BC, bear incised symbols, the Vinci symbols, and have been the subject of considerable controversy among archaeologists, some of whom claim that the symbols represent the earliest known form of writing in the world. Subsequent radiocarbon dating on the Tartaria finds pushed the date of the tablets, and therefore of the whole Vinci culture, much further back, to as long ago as 5500 BC, the time of the early Eridu phase of the Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia. This finding has reversed our concept of the origin of writing, and it is now believed that the Sumerians inherited a Vinci tradition of magical or meaningful scripture, probably following the collapse of the Vinci homeland circa 3500 BC. End quote. Pluto trigger warning.
PSA, the mediocre Yahtzees of the Third Reich culturally appropriated the runes. Furthermore, no mythical Nordic race created the runes, neither.
Gaslight.
Sorry, not sorry. Yahtzee bootlickers, maggots, and incel butch queens, cry me a river of crocodile tears. Despite this tragic, evil legacy that has tainted the runes, it is a great relief, perhaps, to become conscious that the patriarchal Vikings did not create the runes, and this is a creation of a much more mysterious matriarchal culture. Let's now dive even deeper into the mystery and read an excerpt from my book, Astrology for Divination, about the runes' deeper origins in matriarchal antiquity.
Quote, the oldest runic alphabet known to us is the Old Germanic one called the Elder Futhark. It was later organized in 3 atir, aka sets of 8 runes, and the runes were given numerical values. The runes have no order though, as they are free conduits of energy and information that transmit ancient wisdom. Each rune is the epitome of a certain archetype that arises from the well of the universal consciousness. This well could be perceived as the flower of life that expands from the seed of life, which carries the 6-pointed star and also symbolizes the tree of life. It could also be compared to a kind of intergalactic internet. Via Eva Kanaz, page 75 of Runes, Magical Codes of Nature. Famous Lithuanian-American archaeologist Marija Gimbutas' work regarding matriarchal cultures of Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures in Old Europe, a term she introduced, shows strong evidence that runic symbols were present in sacred art long before the Vikings. Eva Kanaz argues that the presence of certain core foundational runes in goddess-centered Neolithic art suggests that these symbols likely evolved aeons ago. Quote, the 6-pointed star, aka the Tree of Life, could be perceived as 3 runes Isa cross or Isa and 2 runes Kenaz. It's interesting that these 2 basic runes are the most crucial and reoccurring symbols in Neolithic Europe. The archaeologist and anthropologist Marija Gimbutas dedicated her whole life to researching ancient European civilizations, especially the peaceful Tripoli culture, which venerated the goddesses. Marija Gimbutas was especially fascinated with their rich depiction of goddess figurines with engraved symbols. The most basic and reoccurring ones resemble runes Isa, Kenaz, and Gebo, which could be perceived as double Isa or double Kenaz, depending on the way you look at it. The connection makes sense, as all the Indo-European civilizations that formed in northern and central Europe after 3000 BC are derived from this culture. In her books, Gimbutas also mentions that the Elder Futhark runes probably stem from prehistory. Eva Kanaz, page 76, Runes, Magical Codes of Nature. Kanaz's book is also a fantastic resource for anyone who studies the tarot and astrology, as she details the various correlations between different runes and tarot cards, zodiac signs, planetary subtle energies, and even certain chakras. For example, rune Isa is associated with the Magician Major Arcana, the Suit of Wands, the Imam Coeli and Medium Coeli axis in astrology, and the Root and Crown chakras. Furthermore, Pethro can be associated with Saturn, Ansus with Jupiter, Tiwaz with Mars, Berkano with Venus, Dagaz with the Moon, Sowilo with the Sun, Turisaz with Uranus, and Lagus with Neptune. There is obvious overlap and resonance between individual runes and these various layers of symbolic implied meaning. What are some practical uses of the runes to incorporate into your magic? There are countless ways to work with the runes. First things first, runes can obviously be used to practice divination, just like with tarot cards. There are plenty of rune decks out on the market, but a lot of people carve the runes into stones to toss or pull out of a bag.
If you are still with me, thank you so much. Hopefully by this point in the Book-umentary, it is obvious that ancient matriarchal cultures were a civilization that lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. Matriarchal matrilineal cultures were concerned with the long game. The mystery of the runes shows us that symbolic communication is much more likely to be effective once your civilization is long gone. The symbolic communication encoded in the runes can hopefully show us that the ancient goddess-centered civilization was deeply concerned with leaving behind messages in a bottle that future generations could interpret, knowing that they would not speak the same physical language, but perhaps they could share a symbolic language. This is why there was so much importance placed on the symbolic recurring motifs in the goddess-centered art. Goddess-centered civilizations, remember, were concerned with multidimensional symbolism, and it is quite amazing that the same symbols repeat and evolve throughout the Paleolithic into the Neolithic and then into the Bronze Age eras. So what did this matriarchal and matrilineal civilization truly look like if it was a global civilization that was connected via spiritual ideas and ideals? How did matriarchal and matrilineal power structures actually function? One fascinating case study of what this matriarchal civilization likely looked like can be found in Catalhoyuk, Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, in which we see here a very famous bust of a seated woman of Catalhoyuk who was flanked by two lionesses on her throne. Note in the lower left corner the golden throne of Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, who came in the 18th dynasty, almost 6,000 years after the seated woman of Catalhoyuk was likely created. The similarities between their thrones is self-evident, speaking of a likely connection between ancient Egypt and ancient Turkey. Catalhoyuk is a very mysterious archaeological site that has been studied for decades, and you're likely not going to hear a peep about it in public school textbooks because it challenges all our patriarchal preconceived notions about civilization and how and when civilization evolved. The Catalhoyuk site shows us that this was a deeply spiritual and sophisticated culture that designed their entire cities, settlements, villages, whatever you want to call their urban centers, around a spiritual system that centered women. Catalhoyuk shows evidence of agriculture and bread baking. Catalhoyuk shows evidence of communal living that centered creativity. There is so many fascinating works of art coming out of Catalhoyuk. It offers an abundance of archaeological artifacts to study for those who are curious to know about the goddess and the bull. Let's now switch lanes to archaeomythology in order to further understand the mystery of Catalhoyuk.
Quote, priestesses and women's collective power. From the early phases of the Neolithic onward, the goddess, whose part is played by the priestess, is portrayed crowned or enthroned. In early historical records and in folklore, she is called queen, mistress, matron, or lady. The priestess goddess is assisted by other priestesses and helpers, numbering from 2, 3, 4, or 9, to a whole college. The attendants performed a variety of duties in rituals and temple maintenance. Priestesses and temple attendants are shown in a variety of sizes and are marked with different symbolic design. Next to the goddess were the priestesses who may have formed a council important for decision-making. Councils of 9 women are mentioned in early historic records and exist in European mythologies. The Scandinavian magician priestesses, known as the Volva, had a council of 9 wise women. Assemblies of 9 priestesses, or muses, are well known in ancient Greece. A splendid example of a group of temple attendants is the model of an open temple from Jarku in Thessaly, dating from the early 5th millennium BC. It includes 9 figurines of various sizes and workmanship. One priestess, or the goddess, is shown much larger than her attendants, and she is richly decorated with her special symbols, chevrons and trilines. Communities of priestesses and women's councils, which must have existed for millennia in Old Europe and in Crete, persisted into the patriarchal era, but only in religious rituals. In the earth fertility ritual of the Themosphorgia, the festival of Demeter in ancient Greece, women did choose a presiding person and form a council in which decisions were voted by majority rule. Men were not allowed to participate. Communities of priestesses having great collective power are well known in early history as sisterhoods of enchantresses, known from Gaulish inscriptions, and as colleges of priestesses living on islands to which men are not admitted, mentioned by Strabo and Pomponius Mela in the 1st century AD. Priestesses as oracles, prophetesses, and magicians are known up to modern times in folklore and myth. Groups of fairies who dance in circles and in meadows or around stone rings, creating enormous energy, appear in folklore from Scotland to Bulgaria, even in the 20th century. The magician goddess, who was originally the goddess of death and regeneration, but who was later considered a magician or a witch, survives up to the present as Basque Marie, Irish Matcha, or Medeb, Baltic Ragana, Scandinavian Freya, and German Holla. These goddesses appear alone or with large groups of assistants, and they exercise supernatural power and control of nature, the moon, the sun, eclipses, storms, hail. They destroy or create fertility of fields and control male sexuality. They themselves are endowed with an inexhaustible sexual energy. Irish Matcha can run faster than the swiftest horses, while the sight of Queen Medeb is sufficient to deprive men of 2/3 of their strength. Those who served the Inquisition in 15th century Spain destroyed huge numbers of witches, those who practiced the rites of the goddess and who had knowledge of medicinal herbs and other healing arts. Among many complaints about the powers of witches given by a soldier to the inquisitor, there is this notable sentence:
They have such power by reason of their arts that they have only to command and men must obey or lose their lives.
Cited by Baroja, 1979, page 149. Myths and beliefs describe the female as the stronger gender, one endowed with magical powers. the sacred marriage. Rituals uniting the sacred male and female forces may have taken place in old European times, but we have little archaeological evidence for them. Although peculiar by modern standards, in both Europe and the Near East, ancient peoples considered this sacred male and female coupling necessary for the well-being and fertility of the land and its inhabitants. We find widespread texts describing sacred marriage rites in the earliest historical records, dating to around 3000 BC, namely. The prevalence of the rite by that time speaks for an earlier origin, probably communal, perhaps in the old European religious system, though little evidence exists. From Catalhoyuk, archaeologists recovered one figurine showing a couple engaging in intercourse. Another came from the Near Eastern Natufian site, dating to about 10,000 BC. The Gumel-Nila lovers, a statuette from the Gumel-Nita site in southern Romania, which depicts a man and woman tenderly embracing, might portray participants in a sacred marriage. In Neolithic art and in myth, the male deities appear as partners of the goddesses. Alongside the mistress of animals is the master of animals, who may be descended from the upper Paleolithic image of the half-human/half-animal found in caves and associated with animals. In Catalhoyuk wall paintings of the 7th millennium BC, a male figure holds a bird in each hand, an image parallel to that of the mistress of the animals known from the Neolithic and later times, who was portrayed grasping geese, cranes, or other birds in each hand. In both the Neolithic and the historical era, the earth fertility goddesses sometimes was portrayed with a male partner. The female and male deities discovered in a grave of the Hamangia culture from the early 5th millennium BC on the coast of the Black Sea very likely represent a sister and brother pair rather than a married couple, since in European mythologies the female and male deities are known to be sister and brother pairs. For example, the Lithuanian Earth Mother, Zemina, has a brother, Zemininkas, and the Scandinavian great goddess Freja has a brother, Freyr. Birth was sacred. In fact, it was probably one of the most sacrosanct events in Neolithic religion. In the early Neolithic, peoples constructed special rooms where birth took place. We may conceive of these rooms as birthing shrines. At Catalhoyuk, in south-central Turkey, ancient Anatolia, excavations revealed a room where inhabitants apparently performed rituals connected with birthing. They painted the room red, reminding us that red, the color of blood, was the color of life. Stylized figures on the walls illustrate women giving birth, while circular forms and wavy lines painted nearby may symbolize the cervix, umbilical cord, and amniotic fluid. A low plaster platform could have been used for actual birthing. The color and symbolism in the room suggests that people regarded birth as a religious event and that they accompanied it with ritual. On the island of Malta in the central Mediterranean, the Tarshian and Minajra temple artifacts indicate similar practices. These artifacts include a model of a low couch that could have served birth-giving and a birth-giving figurine with 9 lines across her back. The connection between moisture, life, and the life-giving goddess contain deep cosmological significance. Human life began in the watery realm of a woman's womb. So, by analogy, the goddess was the source of all human, plant, and animal life. She ruled all water sources, lakes, rivers, springs, wells, and rain clouds. However, the key to understanding Neolithic renditions of the bull's head and horns, bucranium in archaeological literature, comes through their resemblance to the female uterus and fallopian tubes. In the temples of Catalhoyuk, on a series of female forms, there are actually depicted bucrania where the uterus and fallopian tube should be. The analogy takes on more meaning when we consider that rosettes, often identified with bull's horns, correspond to the flower-like ends of the fallopian tubes. The artist, Dorothy Cameron, who originally made this observation, speculates that people observed the corpse's anatomy unfolding during excarnation, when birds of prey stripped away the flesh and exposed the internal organs. However peculiar this symbolism may seem, there is no denying its existence. The crania consistently appear associated with tombs and the goddess's womb. Conclusions. The reconstruction of the pre-Indo-European social structure of Old Europe is possible if various sources from different disciplines are used: linguistic, historical, mythological, religious, archaeological, especially the evidence from cemeteries and settlements. Evidence from these disciplines shows that the Old European social structure was matrilineal, with the succession to the throne and inheritance passing through the female line. The society was organized around a theocratic, democratic temple community guided by a highly respected priestess and her brother, or uncle. A council of women served as a governing body. In all of Old Europe, there is no evidence for the Indo-European type of patriarchal chieftainate. End quote, via Dr. Marija Gimbutas from The Living Goddesses.
I feel it is important to echo Marija Gimbutas' sentiments about the massive misconception of what matriarchy truly was, considering the fears that so many toxic, masculine, mediocre men exhibit about the very word matriarchy, because they believe that it's the opposite of patriarchy, in which cis heterosexual women are dominating cis heterosexual men, when that's not what matriarchy was at all. So what is a matriarchy? A matriarchy is not a society that favors the feminine over the masculine. It is a social system that integrates the idea that every human being originates from a mother as a cultural pattern. A matriarchy recognizes that optimizing a society towards mothers and children creates a just and balanced society. A patriarchy favors the masculine over the feminine. It is a social system that is anti-nature entirely, optimizing the society for whoever is at the top of the pyramid. Therefore, matriarchy is not about dominance of one perceived sex or gender over the other. Matriarchy is about balance and shared power. Some matriarchal indigenous cultures had up to 5 gender and sex categories in which power was equally distributed. Everybody had their role to play. Now let's explore how matriarchy made space for everybody to walk their paths to accumulate personal power.
Quote, "My results suggest that political life, of course it is a hypothesis, it cannot be easily reconstructed, but we can judge from what remains in later periods and from what has always existed in mythology, because this still reflects the social structure, has been structured by the avuncular system. The rules of the land. The queen is equally the high priestess and equally her brother or uncle. The system is therefore called avuncular, which comes from the name uncle. The man, the brother, or the uncle were very important in society, and probably men and women were completely equal. In mythology, we encounter sister-brother pairs of female goddesses and male gods. It is wrong to argue that it is only a culture of women, that there was only one goddess and no god. In art, men were less represented, it is true, but male gods existed. There is no problem regarding this aspect. In all mythologies, for example, in Europe, Germanic or Celtic or Baltic, you will find the Earth Mother or the Earth Goddess and her companion or male counterparts next to her. Furthermore, there are other couples such as the Goddess of Nature, the Regenerator, who appeared in spring and gives life to all the animals on the earth, humans, and plants. She is Artemis in Greek mythology. She is called the Animal Lady, and there are also male counterparts of the same gender called Animal Lords. Representations of this appear in Catalhoyuk in the 7th millennium BC and are found everywhere in prehistory. so that we should absolutely not neglect this aspect. There is a balance between the sexes everywhere, both in religion and in life. Furthermore, they believe that everyone was equal in relation to death. I really like this idea. You are nobody, neither queen nor king, when your bones are gathered together with other bones. The system from which the maternal culture prior to the Indo-Europeans came was very different. I say maternal and not matriarchal because the latter always gives rise to ideas of domination and is semantically opposed to patriarchy. That was a balanced society. It is not true that women were so powerful as to usurp everything that was masculine. Men occupied their rightful positions, did their jobs, had their duties, and even had their power. This is reflected in their symbols, where not only goddesses but also gods are found. The goddesses were creators. They created from themselves. In a time as distant as 35,000 BC, from symbols and sculptures we can observe that the parts of the female body were creative parts, breasts, belly, and buttocks. There was a different vision from ours, which had nothing to do with pornography. The vulva, for example, is one of the first engraved symbols and is symbolically linked to growth and to semen. Sometimes there is a branch or plant pattern near it or even inside it. This type of symbol is very long-lasting, persisting for at least 20,000 years. Even today, in some countries, the vulva is a symbol that offers security of creativity, continuity, and fertility. Religion played a huge role, and the temple was a kind of center of life. The most beautiful constructed objects were produced for the temple. They were very grateful for what they had. They always wanted to thank the goddess. They consecrated her and appreciated her. The head priestess and the queen were one and the same person, and there was a kind of hierarchy of priestesses. Women were equal beings, it is very clear, and perhaps they were more honored because they had more influence in religious life. The temple functioned thanks to women. End quote, via an interview with Dr. Marija Gimbutas on the Mother Goddess, Indo-Europeans, Birth and Development of Patriarchy, originally conducted on the 3rd of October, 1992.
Side note, why were the high priestesses, brothers and uncles, important in matrilineal and matriarchal ancient civilizations? Well, in my humble opinion, when you understand mitochondrial DNA and the context of matrilineal succession, it makes logical sense that the brother and maternal uncle of the high priestess would hold high social status in ancient matriarchal and matrilineal civilizations. Mitochondrial DNA is only passed from mother to child, so the brother and maternal uncle of the high priestess would share the same mitochondrial bloodline. This expanded awareness of the complexity of matrilineal, maternal, matriarchal social structures can hopefully plant seeds of deeper curiosity as to the mystery of it all.
Quote, Isis' Egyptian name means seat, i.e. authority, and is the principle of legitimacy. The actual physical throne, as depicted in the ancient Egyptian symbolism, with Isis wearing a throne/seat upon her head. Osiris, is written in hieroglyphs with the glyph of the throne and the eye, combining the concepts of legitimacy and divinity. Throughout Egyptian history, it was the queen who transmitted the solar blood. The queen was the true sovereign, keeper of the royalty, and guardian of the lineage's purity. Egyptian kings claimed a right to the throne through marriage to the eldest Egyptian princess. By marriage, she transmitted the crown to her husband, but he only acted as her executive agent. The pharaohs, as well as the leaders of smaller localities, adhered to this matriarchal system. If the pharaoh/leader had no daughters, then a dynasty ended and a new dynasty began, with the new reverend maiden woman as a new seed for a new dynasty.
Did matriarchal power structures last for thousands and thousands of years because they understood that subtle soft power has the ultimate say in the long game? Did matriarchal power structures understand that in the mystery of life itself, biology mirrors cosmology. Therefore, subtle cosmic forces are of deep concern to those who are leading a population of people. Perhaps ancient matrilineal and matriarchal power structures developed cosmology, astrology, and numerology, a rich spiritual life that centered the high priestesses, that centered women and centered procreation. Perhaps ancient matriarchal power structures understood that a subtle wait-and-see approach is more effective when cosmic events affect Earth events. Perhaps ancient matriarchal civilizations had a completely alien perception of power. Perhaps ancient matriarchal civilizations perceived authentic power as the invisible hand, subtle forces of the earth and the cosmos that are meant to be worked with in order to exert influence, not dominance. Perhaps ancient matriarchal power structures observed the ebbs and flow of power, the push and pull between polarity. Perhaps ancient matriarchal power structures observe the tension that arises as different groups of people consolidate personal power. Perhaps ancient matriarchal power structures centered collectivism over individualism, understanding that authentic power lies with the people, not power over the people. If there was no organized warfare in ancient matriarchal civilizations, then what is true authentic power? Perhaps matriarchy was more concerned with long-term legitimacy versus short-term authority. All empires fall, all pyramids crumble, chi rises and chi falls, so perhaps ancient matriarchal power structures created spiritual systems, ideas, memes that could travel throughout time and take root and manifest in different cultural contexts. To recapitulate, matriarchy is not the opposite of patriarchy, in which women control, manipulate, and dominate men. No, matriarchy of the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras was something much more mysterious, much more ancient, and much more long-lasting than a patriarchal Ponzi scheme meritocracy masquerading as a democracy, the great grift that keeps on grifting, the patriarchy.
Quote, the dramatic relation between life and death in Catalhoyuk. It is obvious that the dead played an important role in everyday life in Catalhoyuk, a Neolithic and Chalcolithic settlement in southern Anatolia, existing from about 7,100 BC to 5,700 BC. Life was by no means easy. There was a lot of infant mortality, and many women died in childbirth. As a result, death occupied a crucial place in the artworks, and through these artworks, I tried to find out how people in Catalhoyuk dealt with life and death. I also did this on the basis of Sumerian texts, although they were written much later and far away from Catalhoyuk. I am sorry, but I simply could not do otherwise. I start with this ceramic statue made by an anonymous artist about 8,000 years ago. It is very impressive, although it is less than 20 centimeters high. In the middle sits an overwhelming mother goddess who is giving birth to a child. However, she she is sandwiched between two felines, feared predators who live to kill. This image thus shows the contrast between giving life and taking it away. And I got the idea that this contrast was dominant in the Catalhoyuk culture. End quote.
On the right, you can see depictions of various figurines discovered in Catalhoyuk. Note that the red coloring indicates where reconstructions in modern times were done. Therefore, it's important to clarify that the head of the seated woman of Catalhoyuk, enthroned in between two felines, possibly lionesses or leopards, is a reconstruction. We don't actually know what the head looked like originally. Therefore, just keep this in mind when discerning what the facial structure likely was. We can determine this obviously by comparing it to other statues and figures found in Catalhoyuk, but it is another layer of the mystery as to who was truly the enthroned mother goddess. Perhaps this is ironically appropriate that the true identity of the seated mother goddess of Catalhoyuk remains a mystery lost to the sands of time. Perhaps, in my humble opinion, it is only fitting that her true face remains veiled to us.
Quote, could a 12,000-year-old bull geoglyph at Gobekli Tepe relate to older bull and female art 25,000 years ago, and later goddess and the bull cults, like I believe, seem to be at Catalhoyuk? I interpret this as 3 stages in a woman's life and a leopard's pet's life as well, growing in 3 stages with the woman, from a child to adolescence and then a young adult. I reject the proposing that the small middle figure is male. Note the leopard claw in the top middle of the image. Underneath is a female figurine dressed in leopard skin blouse and a fringe woolen skirt. A leopard clawbone pendant from the possible woman shaman priestess burial with a plastered head held in her arms is from Catalhoyuk, which dates from around 9,500 to 7,700 years ago in Turkey. Special items and art, as well as special elite burials at Catalhoyuk. Top view. Here are 2 male figurines sitting that seem to be wearing leopard skin caps that, like the male hunter in the wall art, that are not common, thus likely reflects elite. Note bottom left. Dagger with male burial from shrine level 6B. Moreover, the elite male skeleton seems to also be in a body position at burial, like the 2 male figurines, tightly sitting with his arms at his legs. Note top right corner, the leopard crown. The male hunter from wall art wearing a leopard pelt from the temple in level 3. Note top left corner, purpose male figures. Note middle male hunting figures. Note bottom women's head and women in hunting art. All these depicted figurines or hunting art are from Catalhoyuk, the first religious design city, dating around 9,500 to 7,700 years ago in Turkey. I reject the first 3 fat male figurines, purpose to have bushy beards, on 2 factors. First is that all depictions of male or female are clean-shaven and bald. Second is that all males are depicted as average or thin, and only women as thick or fat. End quote by Damien Marija at Hope.
if you're still with me, dearly beloved, as we are 1 hour deep into the mystery of the Mother Goddess figurines, the Quadruple Goddess. Thank you so much. Let's explore other layers, other levels to the cosmology of the people who lived in ancient Anatolia during the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras, and dive deeper into the connections with other important smoking gun sites that have been discovered, like Gobekli Tepe in Turkey. For everything is interconnected. That is what the study of Archaeo-astrology, cosmology, and archaeomythology teaches us.
Quote, "The Goddess and the Bear, Hybrid Imagery and Symbolism at Catalhoyuk." Introduction. The Neolithic site of Catalhoyuk in Turkey's Konya Plain, circa 7,400 to 6,000 BC, was discovered in 1958 by British archaeologist James Mellart. During 4 seasons of excavation between 1961 and 1965, Mellart's team uncovered over 300 rooms, many of which contain not only well-built domestic features and skillfully produced crafts and tools, but dozens of polychrome wall paintings, clay and plaster bas-reliefs, ritual installations, and sculptures indicating a pervasive and sophisticated ritual life that extended throughout the duration of the Neolithic occupation. The people of Catalhoyuk were not peasants. Apart from being competent agriculturalists, builders, and painters, weavers, and undertakers, they also made baskets, mats, wooden vessels, and clay pots. They smelted copper ore. They carved bone and stone into statuettes of their deities, as well as into mortars, pestles, querns, polishing stones, etc. They carried on one of the most sophisticated chipped stone industries in obsidian, volcanic glass, and imported Syrian flint. They were traders and prospectors, ranging far and wide over southern Anatolia, since the Konya Plain itself lacked all manufacturing resources except food, clay, reeds, and mud. Within the domestic context, Mellart found rooms which he considered to be shrines or sanctuaries containing wall paintings, multiple bucrania, reliefs of various kinds, and numerous human burials. A number of these special rooms contain large anthropomorphic bas-reliefs in a specific open leg posture with arms raised and an orant position. The faces, hands, and feet had all been carefully removed before each room was filled in to provide the foundation for the construction of a new building. The people at Catalhoyuk constructed a cosmology, derived in part from hardwired experiences of certain altered states, and reproduced that cosmology in architecture and images. This approach does not stand isolated, even in the current context of archaeology in Turkey. In his report on Gobekli Tepe, Klaus Schmidt discusses the transition of socioeconomic systems and sociocultural patterns from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, and with the continuity of archaic worldviews. Other researchers have also commented on the fusion of Paleolithic and early agrarian beliefs. Cosmic logics are superimposed over the old cosmic genesis and configurations of the shamanist cosmos. They are still not forgotten in Catalhoyuk. In a spring ceremony among the Neganasan in central Siberia, for example, elder women make offerings to not one goddess, but to the mothers of nature. Kwan Ami, Mother Sun, Muan Ami, Mother Earth, Niun Ami, Mother Life. Mother Sun is the creatrix, the great ancestral mother, the force that generates all living things. The solar deity is radiant. Light and warmth stream from her. In the Arctic and subarctic zones, Mother Sun provides the conditions for life to persist. The Sami people in northern Scandinavia personify the sun as the Sun Maiden. When the shaman transcends the limits of the world of the living and flies to heaven, he/she has to be careful not to be burnt by the hot breast of the Sun Maiden. And the petroglyphs of Siberia, representations of the creatrix, are often associated with animals. Neolithic depictions of this divinity are known from the area of Okinawa in western Siberia. Snakes undulating as the flames of the sun are symbols of the regenerative potential of this solar deity who takes on the task of creation, the great labor of generating and regenerating life. As a related variant, in the shamanism of the Altaic peoples, the origin of all life was born from the goddess of fire, Ene. In the communities of the Tungus, Mongol, and Turkic peoples of Siberia, there was a special professional group of female shamans, the Udagan, whose rituals focused on fire worship. Pregnancy and life-giving are the major themes of the goddess of fire, expressed in pictorial associations of the primordial goddess with the tree of life. The mythical power that has been attributed to female figures in different roles from prehistoric times to the present finds is counterpart in the respect for women's spiritual abilities for maintaining community life and the rules of cosmic order, as, for instance, among the Nanettes. Violation of the rules could lead to universal catastrophe, and women, in particular, were responsible for maintaining the existing order of things, since, according to mythological and poetic stereotypes, they were endowed with enormous capacities for both destruction and creation. In contrast to goddesses of the historical periods, Gimbutas defined an earlier concept of goddess in all her manifestations as a symbol of the unity of all life in nature. Her power was in water and stone, in tomb and cave, in animals and birds, snakes and fish, hills, trees and flowers, hence the holistic and mythopoeic perception of the sacredness and mystery of all there is on earth. End quote, via the Journal of Archaeo-Mythology.
Therefore, with this expanded awareness, we can now theorize with high probability that many of the, quote, hunting, unquote, scenes which patriarchal archaeology has projected onto so much Paleolithic and Neolithic art, perhaps since these were matriarchal civilizations and cultures that created this artwork, there is deeper layers of implied meaning. Perhaps there are both men and women participating in hunting, not just men. Perhaps as well, these are shamans and shamanesses participating in ritualized hunting or rituals involving interaction with animal totems. There is so much more mystery here, and that mystery is cosmic, because if you do not have the framework of cosmology, you are not going to understand the actual implied meaning of Paleolithic and Neolithic art. Everything must have a cosmological or astrological basis in order to understand what we're looking at here. The hunter-gatherer primitive projection of patriarchal quackademia is rooted in sexism and racism, and it is a blockage which prevents us from fully understanding what life was like in ancient matriarchal times. If we believe the gaslight that these were only, quote, primitive hunter-gatherers, unquote, then we're not going to be able to perceive the advanced astronomical and astrological wisdom encoded in the art. Are these star maps of the precession of the equinox, perhaps?
Quote, at Catalhoyuk, some of the cultic hunting scenes depict possible goddesses, female, shamanistic pagan figures, or female ancestor spirits. However, possibly it could be all of these characteristics, which was a female ancestor spirit of a female shaman that turned into a goddess or a demigoddess protector. I view these art scenes as hunting cult behavior of the early paganist males with a totemistic type of warrior shaman, and demonstrations of bravery, taunting, and ritually playing with strong animals such as bears and bulls. Is there one ancestor goddess or demigoddess in each of these three hunting scenes? Well, I think it likely could be so, or at least something like that, as all others seem to be men. Cult ritual, not just standard hunting. End quote by Damien Marie at Hope. Quote, Cro-Magnon hunter, Orion and Osiris. The Cro-Magnon would have observed the heavens or the illusory patterns formed by the alignment of various stars. Depictions of the various constellations such as Taurus and Orion and mythology surrounding them are of great antiquity, and it appears that similar patterns were observed by the Cro-Magnon people. Consider, for example, the sorcerers or shamans wearing the horns of a bull and possibly representing the constellation of Taurus, a symbol which appears repeatedly in Lausel, the Hall of the Bulls, and in the deep recesses of other underground cathedrals dated from 18,000 to 30,000 before present. And above the back of one of these charging bulls appears a grouping of dots or stars, which many authors believe may represent the Pleiades, which is associated with Taurus. These Paleolithic paintings of the bull appear to be the earliest representation of the Taurus constellation. The shaman, attired in animal skins and stag antlers, graces the upper wall directly above the entrance to the gallery at Les Trois Frères in southern France, possibly representing the constellation of Orion/Osiris. End quote, via Ron Gabriel Joseph, via the Astrobiology Research Center, first published in 2017 in Paleolithic Cosmology and Astronomy, 30,000 BC, Constellations, Cave Paintings, and Cosmological Consciousness.
If you're still with me, dearly beloved, thank you so much. Let's level up, buttercups. Keep on moving into the mystery, for if you can believe it, there are perhaps even more levels of deeper implied meaning to the goddess figurines. Some researchers, such as Noah Sage, have proposed that certain goddess figurines, such as the well-known Venus of Willendorf, is in one aspect depicting a cataclysmic comet impact. The comet impact theory, in my humble opinion, is one of the most intriguing ideas coming from Archaeo-Astronomy and Archaeo-Astrology about the goddess figurine. So let's dive deeper.
Quote, so if they are not fat, distorted women, what are they? Perhaps they are images of large comets impacting with Earth, which would have caused tremendous disturbances in the planet's magnetosphere, cosmic ray influx, and layers of sedimentary material. In other words, two large comets impacted and caused a reshaping of the planet. I will let the images and sketches tell the rest of the story. End quote, via noahsage.com.
While admittedly this may sound far-fetched to some scholarly ears, I fully find the idea fascinating considering the context of the Younger Dryas catastrophe, which surely was caused by a comet impact over 12,000 years ago. And we perhaps see evidence of this particular comet impact during the Younger Dryas at a pillar in Gobekli Tepe called Pillar 43, which is also in Turkey, like Catalhoyuk. Therefore, the interconnectivity is resonating at such a loud frequency. It is begging us to connect the dots here. There would be a vested interest in a culture that experienced its civilization being hit by multiple comet fragments during the Younger Dryas catastrophe to leave behind some type of record of this cataclysmic event, this apocalyptic event. And it was of utmost importance in so many other artifacts that the civilization left behind in ancient Anatolia. So it just makes sense that through this focal lens of reinterpreting all ancient artifacts, not merely as just artwork, but documentation of perhaps very real, tangible, meaningful earth events, and not just intangible spiritual ideas and symbolic communication. All aspects are valid. There are multiple levels, and all levels ring true. Just because it is true in one aspect does not mean the other aspects are also not true. This is yes and when interpreting Paleolithic and Neolithic art. Everything is open for interpretation, and I think this idea of the Mother Goddess figurines encoding information about cyclical catastrophe triggered by the precession of the equinox synthesizes all the threads quite nicely together for me personally. Side note, I feel it's important to clarify that I fully understand that the Venus of Willendorf statue, the goddess of Willendorf, predates the Younger Dryas catastrophe. I am not proposing that this particular statue is related to the Younger Dryas comet impact hypothesis. However, what I am proposing is what we're looking at here is a continuation of a legacy tradition that evolved during the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras, in which symbolic art such as the Mother Goddess statues, animistic nature art, are symbolically communicating to us concepts about cataclysmic cosmic events that changed the earth in such a profound way. Ancient peoples were compelled to document these cataclysmic events and create a physical, tangible object that could carry that memory forward into time. That way future generations never forget what happened. The connection here is that the Venus of Willendorf, just like Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe, which came thousands of years later, communicate to us these complex concepts and cosmic cataclysmic events. How would they summarize and encode all that information in a way that would convey it to future generations in meaningful and effective ways? That is the connection between the goddess figurines and Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe. This is a continuation of a legacy tradition of symbolic art encoding cosmic and astronomical advanced wisdom. Just because the Venus of Willendorf predates the Younger Dryas catastrophe does not mean that it's not describing a past comet impact whose cycle overlaps with the future cycle of the Younger Dryas comet impact. Catastrophes like comet impacts, cataclysmic Earth events, as well as extreme climate change are cyclical and are, by some mysterious reason, connected to the precession of the equinox, to the movement of the cosmos. So if comets, for example, were a cyclical phenomenon, then it would make sense that ancient cultures would create documentation of these celestial events. Whether or not you want to admit it, we as a collective on Earth are constantly at threat to cosmic comet impacts. We are constantly dancing with danger with the cosmos, and in fact, 2 times every year, our planet moves through the Taurid meteor stream, where likely the comet that hit Earth during the Younger Dryas impact came from. So just keep that in mind. Let's now read an excerpt from my book, Astrology for Divination, about the mystery of Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe, the mystery of Cygnus, the mystery of the goddess Deneb, the eater of the souls of the damned, Reverend Mother.
Quote, comet associations with different deities, for example Juna, Vesta, Ceres, etc., are not just a modern astrological fantasy projection. Such an obvious sign falling from the heavens was not rationalized away as mere coincidence, simply a flaming rock impacting Earth randomly. Is there a more profound reason why comets, asteroids, and meteors were given mystical, almost fearful reverence in ancient cultures? It seems the ancients were deeply concerned with tracking and predicting comet impacts in order to preserve the memory of past collision cataclysms triggered by the Earth's precession through the equinox. Archaeo-astronomy as a discipline sheds new ideas about the importance of comet impacts. Graham Hancock and Martin Sweatman's work on Gobekli Tepe's Pillar 43 in Turkey, as featured in the Netflix documentary Ancient Apocalypse, drew international attention to the younger Dryas comet impact theory. In a paper published in the journal Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeo-metry, they argue that the so-called vulture stone carved on Pillar 43 is a date stamp for a catastrophic comet strike 13,000 years ago. It appears Gobekli Tepe was, among other things, an observatory for monitoring the night sky. Martin Sweatman, a chemical engineer at the University of Edinburgh and the study's lead author, said in a media release, one of its pillars seems to have served as a memorial to this devastating event, probably the worst day in history since the end of the Ice Age. This is spooky and eerie, Hancock said, because it appears there is overwhelming evidence that the people who made Gobekli Tepe had a profound knowledge of precession, and it appears that they deliberately sent forward into time, in this time capsule, a picture of the sky and our age. Furthermore, Sweatman, along with Hancock, argues that the carvings on the stone are in a clockwise progression that represents the constellations in the night sky. It is our Rosetta Stone, Sweatman proclaims. Astoundingly, he then asserts that the pattern of asterisms could only have occurred on the day a comet struck Earth 12,800 years ago. If true, it would be one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries ever made. Stone Age people documenting a comet strike that may have occurred 12,800 years ago deserves a full spread in a top scientific journal, such as Nature or Science. It does appear a comet or comets struck about 12,800 years ago based on detailed dating and other evidence found in the layers deposited worldwide from the impact. Sweatman claims on Pillar 43, the famous vulture stone. Pillar 43 is a date stamp for 10,950 BC plus or minus 250 years, i.e. 12,950 years ago. Finally, Hancock contends, however improbable it may seem, therefore, we are obliged to consider the possibility that in 9,600 BC, 1,350 years after the comet strike, the builders of Gobekli Tepe were already so advanced in their knowledge of precession that they were able to calculate its effects for thousands of years backward and forward in time in order to produce an accurate symbolic picture. If I understand the message correctly, we're in the danger zone now. By a process of elimination, we have seen that Gobekli Tepe cannot be inviting us to consider the equinoxes, and nor can it be inviting us to consider the summer solstice, even at the favorable moment of sunset. This leaves us only with the winter solstice, with the sun in Sagittarius, targeting the center of the Milky Way galaxy, the definitive astronomical signature of the years between 1960 and 2040 in our own epoch, a signature that recurs only at 26,000 year intervals. Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe suggests we are a species with amnesia whom have forgotten a massive comet impact which forever altered our planet at the end of the last ice age. Therefore, comets could be interpreted as important agents in the evolution of civilization on Earth. Alternatively, comets could also be interpreted as a message reminding humanity of Earth's fragility in the greater solar system. Or, on an even deeper level, these heavenly agents could be a reminder of life's origins. End quote, via Astrology for Divination, magical guidebook for decoding your birth chart.
The younger Dryas comet impact hypothesis is corroborated by Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe. Tracking comets in ancient astronomy and astrology's original cultural context was of practical importance for the civilization's longevity. The implications of comets as well were deeply mystical events for ancient peoples. My intention is to present information through a synthesized web to weave together a narrative. That way the curious student of Archaeo-astrology and Archaeo-astronomy can make up their own mind and come to their own intuitive interpretations of what the information is telling us. If you're still with me, dearly beloved, thank you so much. As we near the final stages of our journey in this Archaeo-astrology book-umentary, I would like now to synthesize some deeper subtext that perhaps my astute witches in the collective Coven have already put two and two together. In my humble opinion, what I am hinting at here is the Paleolithic and Neolithic matriarchal, matrilineal, and maternal civilization that we have explored through our focal point of ancient Anatolia in modern-day Turkey is deeply connected to the same wisdom, lineage, legacy of the Isis mystery school, which, as we have learned, was a covert matriarchal power structure that existed simultaneously behind the scenes of the overt patriarchal power structures that developed during the dynastic eras of Egypt which we associate with the pharaohs. The sisterhood or mystery school of Isis has deep roots in antiquity. The seed that planted this mystery school likely comes from even before the time of Catalhoyuk and Gobekli Tepe, perhaps from aeons ago. Why do we see this repeating motif of the two lions all across the globe? Was this covert matriarchal power structure a global coven or council of highly evolved women and two spirits? Was this covert matriarchal power structure, which we see its claws have sunk into so many different parts of the globe, was the mystery school of Isis something that goes back 30,000 years ago? Does it go back perhaps 60,000 years ago? Does it even go back as far as 100,000, 200,000 years ago? In my humble opinion, the fact that we see the same iconography, the same symbolic communication in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, ancient Nubia, and ancient Anatolia, modern day Turkey, shows that the connection that is self-evident may not necessarily be a genetic connection. It may not be a racial connection. It may not even be a physical connection in which one party from perhaps Turkey migrated into Egypt. That is not what I am proposing here. What I am suggesting is that the mystery school of Isis was a spiritual system that took root in multiple timelines and multiple civilizations, and it stems from a long lost mother culture that likely developed even before the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras. In my humble opinion, ancient Africa is the source of civilization itself, and we must acknowledge the deep anti-black racism that is pervasive in Eurocentric studies. And we must acknowledge that when we're talking about the Paleolithic and the Neolithic eras, melanated people were in Europe before white people even existed. Melanated people were likely in ancient Anatolia before white people even existed. Melanated people, when we go back in time to 30,000 years ago, 60,000 years ago, we must acknowledge that melanated people were the prototype majority, and therefore this is why I feel there is this deep implied connection between ancient Kemet, ancient Nubia, ancient Egypt with Turkey. Perhaps the people at Catalhoyuk were melanated. Perhaps the people of Gobekli Tepe were melanated peoples, but really what's more relevant is that their spiritual wisdom system, their profound astronomical knowledge and astronomical awareness of the precession of the equinoxes stems from the tradition and legacy of melanated peoples coming out of modern day Egypt, modern-day Sudan, modern-day Chad. This is the truth, perhaps, which has been so deeply obscured by internalized supremacy ideologies that we can't even fathom. We can't even accept the likely logical deduction that the first Europeans were melanated, that the first peoples in all continents were melanated peoples, no matter where you go. No matter if it's in Turkey, no matter if it's in Britain, no matter if it's in China, the first humans to arrive on those continents out of Africa were melanated, and therefore the mystery school of Isis is indigenous to Africa. The connections are self-evident and deeply mysterious and deeply intriguing. And there are connections, whether or not you choose to remain willfully blind and in denial. These connections, repeat, are self-evident truths, and they're inviting us to dive deeper into the mystery of it all and ask the questions that academics and archaeologists and Egyptologists of Eurocentric circles refuse to ask. Patriarchy likes to reduce and minimize the timelines of ancient civilizations. One, to erase the evidence that matriarchy existed for hundreds of thousands of years and that organized warfare was not the status quo. Two, because anti-black racism seeks to erase all evidence showing that civilization evolved out of Africa. And three, to erase evidence that ancient matriarchy was way more progressive than the barbaric, pitiful excuse for civilization that we call modern patriarchy. Perhaps matriarchy was queer, polyamorous, and fluid. So, right there, we have the trifecta of queerphobia, anti-black racism, and sexism, which has fueled the systemic cover-up of all the information that I have presented so far in this Archaeo-astrology book-umentary. Do not underestimate the lengths that the cis heterosexual white man mediocre bootlicker colonizer will go to in order to gaslight us all, rewrite history, and erase herstory. Do not underestimate what they are capable of when it comes to the force field of resistance hiding the evidence we are looking for to legitimize the likely reality that in the ancient world, organized warfare, domination, and patriarchal power over were not the norm. Perhaps the walk-away lesson that we can learn from covert matriarchal power structures like the mystery school of Isis is that perhaps true authentic power lies within creating spiritual systems that elevate the consciousness of the people and that persist throughout the precession of the equinoxes. Perhaps authentic power is creating symbols that future generations can find meaning in, even though they do not speak the same tongue. Perhaps authentic power, which the mystery school of Isis very much understood, lies within the realms of the immaterial. We sometimes underestimate the power of the mind, the power of belief, the power inherent in the spiritual mysteries. What is our true potential as human beings? What capacities do we have lying dormant within us to evolve, to expand, to create, and to destroy? The erasure of the feminine has been so systematic in patriarchy that we only associate power with violent warfare, control, and oppression, colonization, resource monopolization, and extraction, cultural appropriation, occupation, and deception, manipulation, maladaptation, and microaggressions. All of these short-term patriarchal illusions of power fail to measure up. They pale in comparison to the long-term power of the quadruple goddess, whose power lies within creation, destruction, regeneration, and rebirth. In my humble opinion, the quadruple goddess, which is embodied in the mother goddess figurines, is a deeper aspect to the more well-known triple goddess of maiden, mother, and crone, aka virgin, mother, and crone, aka maiden, mother, and matriarch, as I like to personally say. The quadruple goddess, in my humble opinion, resonates more because of the number 4 being a archetypal number, the quattufold reality, the 4 directions, the 4 quadrants of the Milky Way, 4 being as well the number of materialization is so appropriate for the mother goddess, whose realm lies within the ability to manifest spirit into physical matter via the process of procreation. During the transition from matriarchy to patriarchy, men identified the power of the quadruple goddess and developed deep procreation envy. And this is likely what fueled the theft of the feminine mystery school's wisdom. Patriarchy, in a nutshell, therefore, stole, co-opted, distorted, and tainted the sacred wisdom of the quadruple goddess. Patriarchy weaponized the goddess's most sacred power of procreation and turned that weapon against the very people itself. Patriarchy weaponized procreation in order to enslave women. Patriarchy is the great grift that keeps on grifting, in that its authority has no legitimacy, because everything that it has, it got from the quadruple goddess. Everything it has comes from a deeper source material. Patriarchy is the illusion of authentic power, because patriarchy only got power in the first place because it normalized grape, control, and domination of the archetypal feminine. Because patriarchy stole the sacred power objects from the feminine mystery schools, because patriarchy decided that empowered women were better off under their boot versus on the throne. Despite this nearly 6,000 year hiccup that is the patriarchy, a failed experiment, the legacy of the quadruple goddess persists into modern times, because she cannot be erased, she cannot be forgotten, she cannot be devalued, discarded, and deflected into the shadows, because the quadruple goddess is the source of civilization itself. Archaeo-astrology connects the dots and shows us that astronomy, astrology, cosmology, numerology is wisdom stemming from the quadruple goddess. So next time any human being, especially a mediocre man, asks you, "Do you really believe in all that astrology crap? I heard it's bullshit," just know that is coming from a place of willful ignorance for what the red-pilled, not all men, mediocre manosphere may not know is that every single time you delegitimize astrology, cosmology, numerology, they are delegitimizing sacred women's wisdom that was most likely developed by Black and Indigenous women of color. misogynoir, the intersection of misogyny and anti-black racism, is the root wound of the discarding, devaluing, and delegitimization of the quadruple goddess. So in my humble opinion, the mystery of the mother goddess figurines is cosmic in proportion. No matter what angle you approach the mystery of the quadruple goddess from, all roads lead back to this principle that was perhaps of utmost importance in ancient matriarchal cultures. Biology mirrors cosmology. As above, so below. As within, so without, is the mantra of the quadruple goddess. Thank you so much, Collective Coven. If you tuned in all the way to the end of this Archaeo-astrology book-umentary, I am deeply grateful to any and all comrades out in the Collective Coven. Loka samasa sukino babantu. May all beings be liberated.